It's the first week in October, and I'm going to have a look at my colonies here to make sure that they've got a pretty good chance of getting through the winter. Now, when I say get through the winter, I really do mean to produce a colony strong enough to produce a crop next year. So there are several things you need to do. You need to make sure that they've got a decent queen, that they've got enough bees to get them through, and enough bees of the right age too. It's probably more important that you get younger bees rather than a mass of older bees that perhaps have finished foraging and are closer towards the end of their life than they are the beginning. They need food as well, and that needs to be food that is accessible. So that's mainly liquid stores, and certainly towards the end of the year you get or we get in this area quite a lot of ivy. Now ivy in West Sussex, or my area of West Sussex, has really only started yielding quite heavily since about the turn of the century, or even just a little bit later. The problem with ivy is it does granulate, and if you get a lot in the brood chamber in one lump, cold weather, the bees cluster very tightly, and they can't really use the granulated honey because they can't get the water to liquefy it. So I need to make sure that I've at least got some liquid stores in there, and if possible it's distributed reasonably evenly, and we don't end up with a band of granulated honey that the bees can't use. It's all very well beekeepers saying, oh yes, but there's food 2 or 3 inches away, surely the bees know it's there. No, they don't, because when they're in tight cluster, they're hardly moving, they're only just moving, and they eat the food that's close to them. Anything such as a gap, and it doesn't matter what the gap is, the gap could be stores they can't use, or even wood like a frame. So if you've got perhaps multiple brood chambers, double brood chamber, brood and a half or whatever, if the weather is cold and they're in tight cluster, they can't move from the frames that they're on. So if they run out of food, they sort of assume that there isn't any more, simply because they've run out of food. So they need food. It needs to be in good condition as well. So feeding syrup late, when the bees haven't got a chance to seal it, can cause fermentation, which can then cause some problem during the winter. Fermentation in itself isn't necessarily a problem, but what it can do is it can mean, especially if the bees can't go out and on cleansing flights, it can mean that they defecate within the hive. So if there is much nosema present, other bees come and clean it up, and then the infection can very, very quickly spread. They also need a dry hive, and they also need a vermin-proof hive as well. So not now, but later I'll put on mouse guards if necessary. None of the hives here, and I've got 27 in the apiary at the moment, none of them will need mouse guards because they're all on what I call shallow floors, and the mice can't get in. So I don't need mouse guards. I will probably put woodpecker guards around, because even in a village situation like this, woodpeckers can come in, and that's green woodpeckers, what we call yaffles, can come in and they can go through the side of the hive, and I've seen them do it in 5 minutes flat. It's just straight through, and I know I'm not repeating that. So that's what bees need to get through the winter: a decent queen, bees, food, and a dry vermin-proof hive. Now, if you have treated with thymol products, what can very often happen is, if it's the ones that you put immediately above the brood, some colonies, and in my experience about 50% of them, can migrate the brood nest over to one side. That can cause a problem during the winter, because if they run out of food the frames that they're on, they struggle to get across to other food. So what I try and do is make sure they've got food both sides. So what I do is centralise them, and if perhaps they've moved over to one side, so you end up, let's say, with one frame of food one side and 5 or 6 the other, all I do is just take a couple from one side, move them round to the other side, and they've got you effectively centralise them, so they've got roughly the same amount of food each side. So what I'm going to do now is open up one colony and just show you what I do. Right now, it's important that you know a little bit about your colonies and a little bit about the history. This one produced quite a lot of honey this year. It was a full colony, so I'm expecting it to be full going into the winter. The usual thing, just a little bit of smoke, roof off, down there. Now at this point I generally heft, just to see what it is. Now that is heavy. Don't forget to heft both sides. Now there's been no feeding in this apiary at all this year, because being locally adapted bees, they've got plenty of food, or quite a lot of food, in the brood chamber, and we've had IV yielding for probably a couple of weeks now. There's only been a couple of days when there hasn't been any coming in. So we'll just check. The queen should be clipped and marked, or she was last time she was seen, and that's everything should be okay. So really all I'm going to do is just check to see where the brood nest is, which side, and if the queen is laying. If she's not laying, I'm not too bothered, because in October, locally adapted bees, the queens may well go off lay a little bit. Now, I'm talking to you about my bees here in West Sussex, locally adapted bees. If you've got bees that aren't locally adapted, so perhaps Italians or some of the buckfast I've seen, not that buckfast in my experience are particularly stable, because they do vary quite a bit from what I've seen. Some look after their stores, therefore the queens will go off lay. Others just plough straight through. Now I'm not saying anything for or against buckfast, but I think those that don't really know buckfast or the origins of their buckfast, and they just buy perhaps 1 or 2 queens, you need to be aware that they can be quite variable, or in my experience they can be quite variable. Now the thing is, if they've got wood to wood brood, there isn't going to be much room for the food, so you need to be aware of that. So let's just one thing is that you need to be aware of: late in the season you can have quite a lot of propolis, which is understandable. Now straight away there's bees everywhere, right across the box, so I'm guessing that the brood is somewhere near where it should be. Otherwise, if most of the bees were over one side here, let's say, and not many there, I would suspect that the brood will be here, and mainly food over the other side there. Got no queen excluder here, so I'm just going to check for the queen. She shouldn't be on here, but you never know. It's always worth checking. So I'm just going to release all the ends of the lugs. In fact, what I will do is I think I'll go through every comb here, or every frame rather, just to show you what the bees have got and what they've done. I would normally do this very much quicker than I am at the moment, but for teaching purposes I will go through every comb. With effectively a flow on at the moment, bees working on the ivy, you needn't worry too much about robbing. Okay, now that look is absolutely full up with food. So is the other side, although there's a lot of unsealed food here and also pollen. I'll just have a quick look for the queen. I'm not expecting her to be on there. So just to make a bit of space, I will just lay that down on the ground like that. I wouldn't normally do what I'm going to do now, but I want you to see what's happening in the colony. There again is a frame full of food. The reason this is sealed here is because it wasn't long ago that there was brood in there, so the bees are actually filling it up. Now we're into brood. We've got brood here. I will just move them away because, as I normally do, I just check for signs of possible AFB and possible EFB. Right, now what's happened here is that the queen is beginning to be crowded out because there's no unsealed brood whatsoever, and all the gaps are filled up with nectar and pollen. So that's the third frame in. Now if I've got roughly the same the other side, then I won't be able to do much about it. The bees are rather calm, although the temperature is reasonably low. It's about 15 to 16. Right, now there's a little bit of young brood there. There's been a bit of a brood break on that comb alone, but there's eggs and young larvae in there, probably 4 days old for the laying of the egg, and the same there. I'm not really looking for the queen because I know she's here. Now these frames are pretty well covered with bees. They're well populated, so I have absolutely no concern about this colony getting through the winter. There's more space in here, but you can see they're very definitely contracting the brood nest, which is a good sign as far as locally adapted bees are concerned. If at this time of year you've got almost wood to wood brood, then you need to be very careful. You're going to need an awful lot more food in those sort of colonies than this one here. Now I did say that the queen is clipped and marked, or the last time I saw she was. There may well have been an autumn supersedure, but I don't know. Now again, we've got filled up vacated brood cells here. There is just a queen cell there with a bee got its head stuck in. I'll just check that there's no egg in that. and that's okay. Now that frame there has got a hole in the middle. That is absolutely great for bees for wintering, because they can move between frames, whereas normally a lot of beekeepers holes in frames and they just replace the frames, replace the combs rather, and that doesn't allow the bees to move around the hive so much. So of course when you get a frame during the winter, when when the bees go in tight cluster, if they need to move between between one comb and another, because they're in tight cluster, they can't get over the top, underneath, or around the edges. But if there's holes in the comb, then it's a lot easier for them. Now, if you noticed, I hefted this colony, and I was satisfied that it was that it had enough food to get through the winter. This, as a locally adapted colony, I wouldn't have any problems at all with starvation. That frame is well covered with bees. You can only just about see the brood, so I haven't got a problem with that at all. It's looking as if we're going to have on this occasion another week or so's fine weather, so I think probably they will fill up the vacated brood cells. The brood on that. I've got to take into account there were 2 frames this side with no brood on, so now I've got to start thinking about what's the other side. That there is probably equivalent of 1/3 of a frame of brood which will emerge, and the same that side, look. So that is going to be the equivalent of a frame of just a bit more of young bees when it emerges. So that is going to aid the colony. They're going to be the bees that come through the other side. And I'll just move the bees off there, so you can see it's largely sealed brood. What's in the middle here? You've got pollen and you've got nectar. That of course is what bees do in a natural nest, so they got food for the winter. There was 2 bees there feeding each other, but they've gone now. I haven't seen the queen. Now there's 2 frames the other side with no brood on. If there's no brood on this frame here, then what I'll do is I'll just leave it as it is. It doesn't feel quite as heavy as the other, so I suspect there's a bit of brood on. Yes, there is, look. Now, as I said, I haven't checked for the queen, but normally I wouldn't go through a colony like this. I'm really doing it just for information for the viewer, really. That feels really heavy. See, frame of absolutely solid food, and I suspect, but I don't know, we've got exactly the same the other side, although we may have a few yeah, we got unsealed food here and pollen. Incidentally, they've obviously been pushed because this is quite a bit of drone a comb here, and there is brood in the drone comb, so they're obviously pushed into doing it. So I'll just take the last frame out. It's also quite heavy, but probably not completely full on the outside. It is, yep. So, okay. So that then is a good colony for overwintering. It stayed central, so when the thermal treatment was on, the bees didn't migrate to one side or the other. Well, I'm just going to put that back because I've finished the purpose. So that's almost jam-packed full of food. You need to take into account perhaps the age of the combs and the type of box. This is a fairly modern box, whereas some of mine are quite old and they do weigh twice the amount of others. So you need to take that into account when you're hefting. Also the pivot point. So you're lifting at the back, the pivot point at the front, because if it's back here further, it will appear to be lighter than it is. Now with hefting, I just do it by hand. I know some people come up with all sorts of things like lifting with one finger or two fingers or whatever. I have to say I don't bother with too much with that. When you get to a certain age, arthritis tends to sort of take over your activity, so I would probably struggle with one or two fingers anyway. Some people use luggage scales and then treat that as a weight, but of course it doesn't give you a weight. What it does really is just give you a comparison. Nothing against using luggage scales, because it'll give you an indication of, certainly during the winter, of the diminishing weight. So I'm just going to put that back. And I'm more than happy that as it is going to get through the winter. I've got to keep an eye on the weather and what's happening with the bees, because if we have a couple of weeks of ivy coming in, that colony is going to be absolutely packed out. So where the brood emerges, the problem is if the bees fill all the cells up, we then get a cold spell, frost at night and that sort of thing, the bees have got nowhere to cluster, and they do need empty cells for clustering. What you can do is put another box on the top, perhaps a super or something like that. But of course, if you do, you're going to struggle to extract the honey. I think all you can do is probably leave it on there over winter, and then try and deal with it in the spring. But anyway, the purpose of that short video was to try and show beekeepers what the bees have done entirely on their own without any help from the beekeeper. So I think there was a brood on 7 frames, although it was diminishing. There was a little bit of eggs and young larvae, but I think probably the ivy has created the queen out, and she obviously can't lay in cells with nectarine. So I hope you find that useful.